The abstract lens of culture was captured and framed in publication 250 in 15 chapters and verbalized in podcast 138 in ISBN 9798885256254. From a literal perspective, an abstract can be accepted as a short summary of published or unpublished research paper, usually about a paragraph. However, at the end of the day, existing a thought, this ethos can be categorized as the total way of life of a people. Abstractly speaking, since culture is made up of so many elements, and some more obvious than others, then to place the same close together, furthermore side by side, especially with an arresting or surprising effect, or in a way that invites comparison or contrast. For example, just as the precincts of history are seemingly punctuated with timelines, contextually speaking, then this cultural lens, when used as a rhetorical device, has the capacity to capture and frame a sequence of events between the periods 1966 to 2021 regarding the evolution of culture within Barbados's historical space. This expression was juxtaposed against the theory, the determination of the actual temporal sequence of past events. What is important, though, as nouns, the difference between evolution and change is that evolution is general, gradual, directional change, especially one leading to a more advanced or complex form, growth, development, while change is countable, the process of becoming different. This expression and thought brings into focus the construct chrysalis. In this sphere, it is noted that Hipster illustrates culture as always evolving, and since the angle is the perceived size of an object depends on the size of the image projected onto the retina. And therefore, the size of the image depends on the angle of vision. A near and a far object can therefore appear the same size if the edges produce the same angle of vision. A case in point. With an optical device, such as glasses or binoculars, microscope and telescope, the angle of vision can be widened so that the object appears larger, which is favorable for the revolving power of the eye. In the scheme of things, I humbly suggest that the aforesaid reason implies that culture consists of abstract ideas, values, and perceptions of the world that inform and are reflected in people's behavior. Make no mistake, culture is shared by members of a society and produces behavior that is intelligible to other members of that society. That said, cultures are learned rather than inherited, and by the same token, it can be interpreted as the different parts of a culture functioning as an integrated whole, a view espoused by Andre Sanders. Therefore, there is no doubt in my mind that culture defined as the symbols, language, beliefs, values, and artifacts are part of any society draws our attention on two basic components, namely ideas, and symbols, while on the other hand, artifacts, material objects on the other. At this phase, it is essential that I introduce Leslie A. White's perspective. I quote, "Virtually all cultural anthropologists take it for granted, no doubt, that culture is the basic and central concept of their science. There is, however, a disturbing lack of agreement as to what they mean by this term. To some, culture is learned behavior. To others, it is not behavior at all, but an abstraction from behavior, whatever that is. Stone axes and pottery bowls are culture to some anthropologists, but no material objects can be culture to others. Culture exists only in the mind, according to some. It consists of observable things and events in the external world to others. Some anthropologists think of culture as consistent of ideas, but they are divided upon the question of their locus. Some say they are in the minds of the peoples studied. Others hold that they are in the minds of ethnologists. We go on to culture is a psychic defense mechanism. Culture consists of TZ different social signals correlated with M different responses. During the closing decades of the 19th century and the early years of the 20th, the great majority of cultural anthropologists, we believe, held to the conception expression by E.B. Taylor in 1871 in the opening lines of Primitive Culture. Culture is that complex whole which includes knowledge, belief, art, morals, law, custom, and any other capabilities and habits acquired by man as a member of society. Tyler does not make it explicit in this statement that culture is the peculiar possession of man, but it is therein implied, and in other places he makes the point clear and explicit. Tyler, 1881, 54, 123, where he deals with the great mental gap between us and the animals. Culture, to Tyler, was the same of all things and events peculiar to the human species. Specifically, he enumerates beliefs, customs, objects, hatchet, as, chisel, and so on, and techniques, wood chopping, fishing, shooting, and spearing game, for making, and so on. Tyler, 1913, S6. End quote. It is because of the aforesaid explanation that culture is that background of every human communication, but invariably the aforesaid ethos is also an embedding as a feature of text in general and is also valid in technical and scientific texts. As translation by humans is based on understanding, the translator needs knowledge in order to detect cultural aspects. Further to this point, it is noted that there are also degrees of visibility of cultural behavior, ranging from the regularized activities of persons to their internal reason for so doing. In other words, we cannot see culture as such. We can only see human behavior through the abstract lens of culture. In this space, there is a belief that artifact is perceived as an artificial product and artifact is an object produced or shaped by human craft, yet they are influenced by sense of perception and philosophy within every cultural space. Ostensibly, there seems to be a nexus between the differing and sometimes conflicting views as to just what is meant by culture. Plausibly, culture is an essential part of conflict and conflict resolution. Factually speaking, verbalizing culture is an extremely vast, complex doctrine and presumably rooted in the theory of eisegesis and exegesis. That is why there is the visual motion perception in the abstract, which has stimulated my cognitive lens while analyzing the photos and the statue of a living legend of the Reverend Sir Wesley Winfield Hall, KT, GCM, HMB, LLD, Honours, JP, located at Kensington Oval, Bridgetown, Barbados, which becomes part of the history of tourism. To this end, tourism began long before the coinage of the world tourist at the end of the 18th century. Then, tourism is a product of modern social arrangements beginning in Western Europe in the 17th century, although it has antecedents in classical antiquity. Modern tourism is an increasingly intensive, commercially organized, business-oriented set of activities whose roots can be found in the industrial and post-industrial West. Another aspect of abstract which characterizes dragonflies' usual course of life and range of their activities are represented in human culture on artifacts such as pottery, rock paintings, statues, and Art Nouveau jewelry. Since the culture of a people in their identity as it affords them due recognition, a view espoused by Couchet-Bos. Therefore, in the scheme of things, if culture is lost, then it is inevitable on condition of acculturation, aging population, concentration and contemplation, globalization, ideology, invention, technology, and all cultural patterns being replaced by new ones. To all intents and purposes, although the word paper is the origin and historical development derived from papyrus, yet the two are produced very differently, and the development of the first is distinct from the development of the second. Correspondingly, the fact that paper dates back almost 2,000 years to when inventors in China first crafted cloth sheets to record their drawings and writings. Since science were expanding in colleges and universities, and scientists felt that students needed more and better preparation in secondary and primary schools. Plausibly, the aforesaid statement is one of the reasons why today's natural history is a cross-discipline umbrella of many specialty sciences. For example, geobiology has a strong multidisciplinary nature. At the end of this discourse, the more that I flesh out this ethos, especially the construct abstract, it implies other words. For example, abstract thought, reasoning, systematic thought, train of thought, consideration, problem solving, free thinking, line of thought, thinking, thought process, and critical thinking. And when the proverbial dust is settled, this conversation is still an anthology, compendium, and regardless of culture, whatever lens you are using does not change the fact that, abstractly speaking, since culture is made up of so many elements and some more obvious than others, then to place the same close together, furthermore side by side, especially with an arresting or surprising effect, or in a way that invites comparison or contrast, coupled with the fact that abstract expressionist is a universal visual language. As an author, cinematographer, media art specialist, licensed cultural practitioner, podcaster, and publisher, from a literal perspective, I have randomly selected and compiled anthologies in 15 chapters, abstracts from my 250 publications as an abstract which can be accepted as a short summary of published research. At the end of the day, existed in thought. This ethos can be categorized as the total way of life of a people. To put it succinctly, the abstract lens of culture is about abstract reasoning, also known as abstract thinking, which involves my ability to understand and think with complex concepts that, while real, are not tied to concrete experiences, objects, people, or situations. I had to employ this type of reasoning since it involves thinking about ideas and principles that are often symbolic and or hypothetical. Overall, this conversation, The Abstract Lens of Culture, is a philosophical theoretical discourse which I have analyzed through the abstract cultural lens. It should also be noted that this conversation is a pretext to look at culture differently. In light of the aforesaid announcement, I must confess that all things being equal, this abstract, the abstract lens of culture, was captured and framed in publication 250 in 15 chapters and verbalized in podcast 138 in ISBN 9798 88525 6254.